All right, guys, this is going to be a review for your final exam. We're going to review the majority of the material that we've gone through over class for the past couple of months. And then I'll send your final exam out. If not today, definitely by the end of the weekend. Like I told you, you'll have 2 weeks to complete it. All right, let's get started. So this is CMT 220, construction project scheduling. All right, primary objectives in managing a project: time, budget, quality, safety. Clients need to occupy the building, right? So when we talk about time, time is money. Depending on the structure of your building, it could be a home, a business, a church, whatever. Your clients need to occupy that building. They need to get in there, whether it's a home, they need safe and security of knowing that they're in their home. Business needs to be open for sale. Churches need someplace for their people to congregate. Very simple. Time is money, right? You've got the cost of capital, interest on loans, your land, your construction costs. You've got a loss of business revenue due to delays that cost you money. Let's expand on the budgets a little bit. So what do we have? We've got our base building. That's what it costs to construct our building. We've got land development. That's moving dirt, bringing it in, taking it out. That's adding infrastructure, utilities, etc. Power, gas, whatever, water, sewer. I've got overheads. That's coffee in the trailer. That's payroll for maybe ancillary employees that are directly billed to the job. You've got cost of capital on interests on loans. That's super expensive. You've got quality, right? So we talk about that. So code requirements, that should be the minimum quality. That's just required by the local municipality. You've got client expectations, their level of quality. What do they expect the project to look like? You've got your company expectations, right? Every company has their own set of quality standards. You need to make sure you meet or exceed it. You've got personal pride. You want to make sure that you're putting out the best product possible, right? For your own reputation, for your company's reputation, you want to put out a good product. And safety. You want to build a safe product for everyone that uses it. No question about it. Safety on the job site. Your number one goal is that everybody goes home every day. That's it. No fatalities, no major accidents, right? If you're building too quickly, you can create an unsafe work environment. That's why your schedule needs to have an even flow of activity. You don't want people to get hurt because you're trying to push too fast. Delays, same thing. You may have a project that's stalled for whatever reason. You need to make sure that your safety measures haven't decayed or lessened to the degree where they're not actually creating safety anymore. They're actually causing a hazard. Safety is everyone's job. You want to avoid lawsuits. You don't want to get sued because somebody tripped on your job site because you created an unsafe working environment. And of course, OSHA, that's the Occupational Safety and Health Association. At some point in your career, they're going to visit your job site. You want to make sure you're in compliance with them. You don't want to have to pay a ton of fines because you're not complying with the OSHA regulations. It's important. All right, let's talk about time is money. We've talked about this at length in class, but just want to reiterate it. This is a simple chart. It shows the effects of time delays on construction based on a 9% annual interest rate. 9% is a little steep, but that's all right. It's average. If you look at the historical interest rates, it's not that bad. So if we take a $5 million or $50 million loan, you're actually paying $36 every minute, $2,100 every hour, $17,000 every day, $86,000 a week, $370,000 every month, and then $4.5 million a year. Think about that. If you have one day where somebody doesn't show up on a major project where you've taken out a loan of $50 million, you just lost $17,000. If you take that to a smaller loan, let's say you're building, a big single family home, you're paying $600,000 in construction fees or loans, or interest on your loan. If somebody doesn't show up, it's $208 a day you just wasted. Every hour there's a delay, it's $21 an hour, or $25 an hour, excuse me. It's a ton of money. It adds up. If you have a week with no activity on a $600,000 loan, you've just wasted over $1,000 for nothing. Time is definitely money, and it's important. That's why our schedule, we should have someone in every project every day working until the project is complete. But before we can start evaluating other people's time and dictating how they spend their time, we need to do a little bit of time management of our own. We need to make sure that we're using our time in the best possible way. It's where the Eisenhower matrix comes in, right? So we've got the 4 quadrants. We've talked about this in class. Spent a lot of time talking about time management in class. Quadrant 1 items are urgent and important. Quadrant 2 items are not urgent, but important. Quadrant 3 items are urgent and not important. And then quadrant 4 items are not urgent and not important. So example, so quadrant 1, urgent and important. Building inspector shows up on your job site. That is both urgent and important. An accident happens on your job site. That is both urgent and important. Those are items that have to be taken care of right now. Quadrant 2 items, not urgent, but important. Scheduling. I say it's not urgent because typically nobody is sitting there hounding you to get your schedule updated. It's something that you need to get into the habit of doing. You need to do it every single day. Updating your schedule is incredibly important for the success of your project, but it's not necessarily urgent because you don't have a buzzer going off when you don't update your schedule. Quadrant 3, urgent and not important. This can be your phone, your cell phone constantly buzzing with social media notifications or people calling you just to BS about the fish they caught over the weekend. It's urgent because it's in your face, buzzing, something's blinking, something's making noise, but it's not necessarily important. Quadrant 4, not urgent and not important. These are items like, I hate to pick on the plumbers, but your plumber walking up to you wants to talk to you for 45 minutes about a fish they caught over the weekend. That is not urgent or important. And you need to recognize as you're going through your daily activities, what quadrant you're spending your time in. If you spend the majority of your time in quadrant 2, taking care of important but not urgent tasks, you will spend less time in the rest of the quadrants, and you will have more time to devote to quality, safety, things along those lines, because you will be using your time in the best, most efficient possible manner. It's very important to understand as you go through your day. Is this a quadrant 1 task? Is this quadrant 2? Is this quadrant 3? Is this quadrant 4? How am I spending my time? Make sure you maximize your time in quadrant 2. If anything goes wrong in the job site, is it my fault? If you take this approach, or it is my fault. If you take this approach, you will solve some of the problems rather than just putting the blame on other people. Listen, nobody cares if you have a problem on the job site. What they care about is how you deal with it. Taking responsibility for all aspects of your job it means just that. That means you're looking around and you're making sure that everything on that job site is to your standards and your specifications. Not, well, that's just the way that trade partner does it, so I'm just going to let that go. You need to have the highest standards on that job site. You need to lead by example. So if you take full responsibility of every aspect of that job site, you will be successful, as long as your standards are high enough. We're being totally honest. So assume the responsibility and be proactive. Quadrant 2 is the quadrant of being proactive. Spend your time there. All right, communication. Typically is the biggest problem on the job site, a lack of communication. We've talked about this in the past. Your production schedule is a time machine. It is the greatest communication device you have on that on the job. Why is it a time machine? Because it tells us what happened yesterday, it tells us what's happening today, it tells us what's happening tomorrow. A well-maintained schedule is the best communication device you've got, as long as you're sharing it with your trade partners. All right, why use a formal schedule? Reduces construction time, right? You're not calling everybody every day. Hey, can you show up tomorrow? Can you show up tomorrow? Can you show up tomorrow? You send out a formal schedule at the beginning of the job. Everybody already knows when to show up. There's no delays. So it reduces construction time. It reduces costs in materials, labor, and overhead because you have an even flow of production. You're not waiting. You're not buying materials at the last minute and paying a premium for it. You're not paying a premium for labor because you're trying to pull them from someone else's job to bring them to yours. And you're going to reduce your overhead because you're going to increase the speed at which you can complete the project. Production schedules provides a more continuous flow of work. Like I said, you want somebody in every building every day working until the project is complete. That is the most effective means by which we construct something. Constant workflow. It gives crews and subs a goal to work toward. They know when to show up. They know when to be completed, so they can schedule their own resources to make sure that they get there on time and finish on time. It increases productivity. All right. Also, it improves your company image. There's nothing worse than being asked for a schedule and you're like, well, it's all I got it in my head. No, you don't. It needs to be on paper. It needs to be in a software program on paper somewhere, tangible, that you can share with people. You will be much more thought of as a much more professional company if you have a written schedule. It helps to control time, costs, quality, and safety for all the reasons we just talked about. A good, solid construction schedule or production schedule will make sure that people are on time, that you've ordered the material in advance, and that you are able to provide a safe working environment for everyone. Helps to manage material, labor, money, equipment, and subcontractors. We just talked about that. It forces detailed thinking. When you create the schedule, it forces you to think about the job site as a whole, the whole project. What comes first, second, and third? When do I need materials to make sure that these tasks are completed? It just makes you think on a very detailed level of how you're going to build the project. And it improves communications. You get that schedule out to all your vendors, everybody's on the same page, everybody knows when they're supposed to be there, what they're supposed to do, what they're working on, and when they're supposed to be finished. Types of scheduling systems. All right, we have a bar chart. The bar chart was developed by Henry L. Gantt, developed for the military planning in World War I. We talked about that, and that's just a piece of trivia. We've got critical path schedules, graphic schedules, and electronic schedules. Those are the ones we're going to focus on for the final exam. All right, bar charts. Scheduling advantages. They're simple. They're easy to understand. You've already created multiple bar chart schedules in class using Excel. You all did a fantastic job. They're very visually clear to understand. They're small in size typically, and they're accepted as a default schedule universally. And again, it forces detailed thinking. You have to put one task in front of the other and understand duration days in order to create a bar chart. They do have their limitations though, right? They don't show interdependencies, which is a problem. So when we start talking about critical path, they don't show the critical path on a schedule. They just show tasks. They don't show them, and they don't rank them in level of importance. And they don't identify the activities that are critical to a timely completion. Again, that just takes us back to the critical path or our milestones in our construction scheduling. And they're ineffective in forecasting the effective changes. So if you have to make a change in your schedule, you have to completely redo the bar chart, which is unfortunate and time consuming, and it doesn't show you the importance of that. And it doesn't show the extra potential days on activity. So it doesn't give you any indication of float days. And we'll talk about float in just a second. All right, this is an example of a bar chart. You can see you've got your tasks on one side, your dates on the other. Very limited. The information that this puts out is very limited, but it does show if you are putting your underground plumbing in, it tells you, oh, I'm supposed to be there on July 9th, but it really doesn't tell you when you're supposed to be finished, doesn't give you your durations. It's pretty limited schedule, but it is the default when all else fails. All right, let's talk about critical path. So how to create the schedule. So critical path are, here's an example of a hotel, right? So this shows us our critical path. These are tasks with zero float that cannot be moved. If one of our critical path items is delayed, the project is delayed. There's no question about it. This is our critical path. These are tasks. We know when we're supposed to be finished. So we lay out our critical paths and we're like, okay, excavation and foundation has to be done. Lobby structure has to be completed. Tower structure has to be completed on this date, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, until we are done. If one critical path item gets moved, every task beyond that, every critical path item after that also gets pushed. That's why they're critical. We have a due date for this building. We know what our critical items are. If one moves, everything moves. That's a problem. Construction. All right, let's talk about construction. This slide is in the wrong place. Oh, all right. Actually, this slide is in relation to, let me back up this slide. This is a production flow chart. All right, it shows our critical path, our ancillary tasks. Let's go back to that. Our construction flow chart shows preceding activities such as critical path items. It shows succeeding activities, what has to happen first. So construction flow chart is a good way to, it's essentially a logic diagram to map out your project. Shows concurrent activities. So if I'm working on the inside of the building, I can also work on the outside of the building, and I can show that in two sets of flowing activities. And it shows critical path activities right down the center. And it also shows the amount of float. So let's take a look at that. So this is an example of a flow chart. Here's our critical path right down the center. We know this is critical path because there are 0 float days. They have to be done, except for shingle roof. They have to be done. There's no float. Okay. You look down here, temp power. I've got float days. I've got 5 float days here. Windows and doors, I have 3 days of float. Float is the extra time in a schedule that a task can either start early or finish late, and it won't affect my critical path. We're going to get into that a little bit more. So some advantages, shows the construction logic. That flow diagram shows the logic of construction. We understand, okay, this comes first, second, and third. This can happen at the same time. And a great example is working inside versus outside. Identifies the critical activities, the 80-20 rule. 80% of your results will be based on 20% of your activity. Allows management to set priorities. That's along with your critical path items. It shows the effects of change, order, or delay. Is self-adjusting when updated. Easy to follow visually. It shows you the big picture. Potentially is the most effective scheduling system. Maybe. Helps to analyze different methods or sequences, definitely. And the reason it helps to analyze different methods or sequences, because if you have this flow chart, you can actually say, okay, what if I change this activity and move it over here? Then everything else goes around it. You can look at that and say, wait, that doesn't make sense. Or, oh, you know what, that's a better way of doing it, because it's a very visual way to look at a schedule. It's useful in court cases, keeps you out of court. And it serves as a basis for systems control. It forces management team to plan and think in detail. It's a very visual schedule. Disadvantages. Can become complex. It is the most sophisticated scheduling system. That whole critical path method for scheduling can be super duper complex. And if you're not trained in it, a lot of times, unfortunately, what happens is it becomes too overly complicated, overly burdensome, and people just do away with it completely. It requires training to become an efficient user, and due to not fully understanding CMP and its complexity, it's often abandoned. You will not see that type of construction schedule on 90% of jobs because it's so complicated. Typically, you're going to see some type of an electronic scheduling. Graphic schedules, these are a floor plan marked up or colored to show the schedule, a separate floor plan for each subcontractor or crew. Simple scheduling technique that is easy to understand. However, it is labor intensive to create, and updating them is almost impossible because you have to recreate all the original schedules with new dates. If on a small scale project, this is probably effective with only a few tasks. When you get into a more complex construction project, you're not going to use this. It'd be too labor intensive on the person creating the schedule. This is an example for paint. We're going to paint, this room on the 1st to the 11th. Then we're going to go to this other room on the 13th to the 18th. You get the idea. Small scale project, sure, maybe. Large scale project, no chance. Let's talk about electronic schedules. This is the most common these days. Everybody's got a smartphone in their hand. This is the way people are doing production scheduling now. The advantage is you can download the schedule, the software to your phone, to your iPad, to your PC, whatever you've got. Most are cloud-based, so you can access that schedule from anywhere as long as you have Wi-Fi. They're shareable instantly. If you need to communicate a change in the schedule, you just update it. You update your schedule, your master schedule, and send it out to all your vendors. There's document sharing, so you can actually attach electronic drawings, submittals, scopes of work, um, whatever you need to the schedule itself, and people can view it so they know what they're supposed to be doing. And they're accessible anywhere. A couple of examples: Build Pro, very common for home builders. Supply Pro is very common for vendors or supply companies. Procore, also very popular amongst commercial contractors, particularly tenant fit out. Capterra, Smartsheet, Autodesk, these are all examples of large production scheduling companies that have really good products. Depending on what your company uses, you can't go wrong with any of these. All right, let's talk about the work breakdown structure. This is a systematic means of defining the activities so that each activity can be readily identified by its work breakdown structure number. So what does it matter, right? All right, look at this. When we have when we break the project into activities, it makes it much more easy to number and understand each phase of construction. We break it down. We have pre-construction phase, we have engineering phase, job mobilization phase. You can break this down even further by individual trades. Front end, back end is a very common way to break down construction. That would be, stakeout to close-in inspection to settlement, or to use and occupancy. The break the project into activities could use a work breakdown. Strange slide. Keep the trades and contractual divisions separate. This is super important. You don't want trades on top of each other. You may even want to separate the crews, depending on your level of how detailed you're getting when you break things down. Keep field work separate from shop and office work. We're talking about cost codes. I'm going to show you some that will hopefully clear this up. You're going to determine the level of detail, right? Different levels for different users, and how much detail is too much. You can include the submittal process in your work breakdown. You can include procurement of material. You can include curing time for concrete. You can take a work breakdown schedule and you can just chop it into its smallest possible pieces if you want. Most don't go that detailed, but some do. So when you look at a work breakdown schedule or a work breakdown system, like the numbering systems, you're going to have your company designator, that would be your division number, your job number, lot or building number, task or activity number, and then the reason for that activity. This allows your accounting department to know exactly where you're spending every dollar. So they'll know who's spending it, what phase of construction it's for, what building it's for, what activity it's for, and the reason you're doing it. This is universally used in construction. Every phase or aspect of construction is broken down. It just makes for a much easier way to account for the dollars being spent, as well as, who is spending it, why it's being spent, the amount, where it's being spent. Work breakdown structure is really important. It's important to understand the different phases. Whatever company you work for, it's important to understand how they break down their work structure so that you can more readily understand how they do their scheduling and how they expect their production process to happen. Construction logic diagram is next. So we talked about this quite a bit a few minutes ago, but the best scheduling practice suggests only one beginning activity and only one ending activity for the project. Constructing the logic diagram with a rubber stamp or post-it notes. A lot of people do it this way. The rubber stamp is it has essentially, it's a stamp of a post-it note, if you will, because it's got the task and the duration on it. People use post-it notes as well so they can move them around. They put them on a big whiteboard or whatever, all their activities, and then they put them in order. And then based on the order that they put them in with their post-it notes or their stamps, they then create their production schedule. So make sure the logic is correct, right? So you're going to review your logic diagram with all the team members. You want to make sure that you have total buy-in for everybody on that team to make sure that all your tasks are in the right sequence. You're going to ask the question. Ask question number one of every activity. Does this activity really have to be done before each of the following activities can start? Number two, what other activities need to be done before this activity can start? That's why we say post-it notes, because they can get moved. If you've got some task in the wrong spot, you can move it quickly. Whereas a rubber stamp, you kind of need to erase it somehow. All right, add the durations to the logic diagram. How do you determine the durations of scheduled activities? This is very important. You ask your subcontractors. Estimating or productivity manuals. There's tons of manuals out there that show durations for construction activities. If you're getting it from a manual, you need to be careful though. You need to make sure that it's your right climate zone. You're comparing apples to apples. I'm typically not a fan of using manuals for determining productivity, but they're available if you need them. Subcontractors are a better resource for that. Historic records, previous schedules of jobs that have already been completed is a great way to determine productivity schedules, durations. How long is this going to take? Well, the last job, it took us 4 days to rough in the plumbing. It's about the same size. So you know what? We can, based on history and our previous projects, we can say that this is going to take us 4 days as well. One of the most important things you can do is ask your senior guys. You jump to that. So you can flat out guess. It's not recommended, but you can ask your senior managers, the guys that have been around for a long time and have done it over and over and over again. They are your best resource for establishing duration times for projects, because they'll tell you exactly how long it's going to take. They'll tell you exactly how long each of your vendors needs to complete their task. They'll tell you the pitfalls. They'll give you the history of the projects. All right. There should be a reason for the beginning and ending of every arrow in your logic diagram, right? Do not draw an arrow from or to any activity just because it's convenient. It's not how we build, right? The logic diagram must be absolutely logical. When you're finished, you should look at it and it should make sense. I had to put my foundation in before I can start framing, before I can put my windows in, before I can put my roof on, before I can start my mechanical, electrical, plumbing. It's got to make sense. Of course, here's an example of a logic diagram. I'm not going to ask you guys to calculate float on the final exam, but we are going to talk about the types of float. I'm going to pull them all up here so we can talk about all of them. All right, types of floats. We have total float from the calculations. This is the total amount of float from the duration of the project, from start to finish. What's my total float on this job? You have shared float. This is shared with other activities. So you may have, so float is just built in extra time in a schedule. To keep it very simple, float is built in time on a schedule. And it allows you to determine, if I start a task early, I'll have this much time. If I start a task late, I'll have this much time. My camera just went out. Sorry, guys. So anyway, you have shared float, and that's shared with other activities. So you may have two activities that are actually overlapped and they share some of that float. Independent float belongs to that activity and that activity alone, not shared with other activities. An example of this may be, you may have 5 days scheduled for your framer. You know it's only going to take them 2 days to do it. You've got, or 3 days to complete their task. They've got 2 extra days. That could account for weather, could account for someone not showing up, whatever. You've got 2 extra days of float, but that belongs to that task. Free float, this is not shared with later activities and has no effect on later activities. You have negative float. This is a backward pass done with a forced earlier finish date. Let's talk about how to manage our float. All right, which type of float would you share with the subs? Actually, I'm going to strike this from the final exam. These are just questions that should have been deleted from this presentation. But let's talk about it anyway. So which type of float would you share with the subs? You know, I personally, I don't share any because I want the subs to think that every task is critical. Um, but oftentimes you will share with your subs. You'll tell them, hey, look, I need you to start on Monday. You got till Friday. You get it done in 3 days. Great. You get 2 extra days. So if that means if you don't show up till Wednesday, you still have till Friday. Using float to hide days in the schedule. Absolutely. You know, I used to have a manager, and I think we talked about this in class, that would also always tell me to put in a fishing day. He would always say, oh, don't forget to schedule a day to go fishing. That was my float day. And I would hide it in the schedule just in case I needed to make up extra time. I wouldn't share it with the subs, but I would add it to the schedule just so I had that extra time built in. Um, Sharing shared float in order to make the schedule more manageable. Absolutely. Sometimes you have to double up your trades. You need to give trades more time, maybe subtract it from one trade and give it to another. You need to share that extra time in your schedule. And then use float to manage your resources. Oftentimes you have to do this. You have to allow for extra time. You're going to subtract it from some vendors and give it to others because you need to manage the resources that you've got. So float, the best way to think about float is it is extra time in your schedule to account for delays. And there's all kinds of reasons for delays. We'll talk about that in a second. So critical path items that do not have float. That's one reason this slide is here, just to show you. Our critical path items do not have float. If they move, your project completion date moves, period. All right. Reviewing and analyzing schedules. Review. All right. When you're analyzing a schedule, you need to look at it. Is my schedule complete? Have I captured all of my tasks in that schedule? That's one of the reasons you look at, a visual schedule, like the flow chart that we talked about, because you can have all your tasks listed. You need to make sure that every task that is required to finish your project that's captured in your schedule. Is my schedule reasonable? When you're finished with your schedule, you need to look at it and say, can I build this 5,000 square foot retail store in 90 days? Is that a reasonable time frame? Well, then you start looking at all your tasks and your durations, and you make sure that you've actually added up your time right. You've added your float, and you've added, municipal inspections and that sort of thing. So you know that you've actually created a reasonable schedule. Does my schedule meet my primary goals? What are your goals for the project? Is it a deadline? Is it a cost? You need to make sure that your schedule conforms to your primary goals. I'm here to make 20% of my construction loan. Am I building this fast enough to do that? I don't know. Let me look at my schedule and make sure. Have I satisfied my contractual obligations? Super important to make sure that everything that your client has asked for is in your schedule, including the date, the open date, or the occupancy date for that structure. Any special requests that they have, you need to make sure if they've got specialty things in there, specialty items, flooring, marbles, things like that. You need to make sure that you've captured your lead time to get those materials into your schedule. Are the task relationships valid? Do I have my first, second, and third task in order? Does the activity really need to go first? You need to look at your schedule critically when you're evaluating and say, wait a second, do I need to do this before I do this? I don't know. Do I need to put my sidewalk in before I drywall the building? I should probably drywall first so I don't damage the sidewalk. Does my draw schedule match my activities? We talked about draw schedules. You want to make sure that the money you're bringing in is commensurate with the money you're paying out. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you've scheduled all these tasks, paid for all of them, but you don't have any money coming in. So you need to make sure your draw schedule matches your activities, so you have an even flow of cash coming in and going out. Is my completion date correct? You need to look at the end of your schedule and make sure that you've captured the completion date. Is this too early or is it too late? So let's talk about compressing the schedule. You need to ask yourself, is it necessary? Do I need to compress this schedule? Or am I going to cause problems by doing it? Is there enough float, or can the tasks be doubled up when compressing the schedule? It's very important to make sure that you're not overly burdening your subcontractors or creating an unsafe work environment by compressing your schedule. Hang on, guys. I'm just putting a new battery in my camera here. All right. Will compressing the schedule lead to poor quality? You definitely don't want to produce a product that's not up to your quality standards. But then on the flip side, you may want to expand the project, right? Reasons for expanding the project could be out of your control, like material shortages. Right now with COVID, we're experiencing material shortages all over the place, and that is no good. Labor shortages, also, that's another big hot issue in construction right now. We have a extreme labor shortage of skilled labor in construction. So you may find that you get halfway through a project and you just don't have the bodies to build it. It's going to cause you to expand your project. Failed inspections happens all the time. Weather, we may have a severe winter and we may end up with 20 inches of snow on the ground. You're going to lose a week minimum on that project. You may need to expand your schedule. An underperformance of management team. If you're not managing the project well, that can cause major delays, and you may be the reason you have to extend your deadline date. All right, let's talk about updating your schedule. The most important task you perform is updating your schedule. Absolutely. It must be done every day. Daily? I think I spelled that wrong. Must be performed every day at a minimum once a week, but daily is preferred. It depends on the complexity of your project. Maybe once a week is okay, but your schedule needs to be looked at every day. Updating your schedule communicates priorities to your subcontractors, so they know what's important, when to be there. It communicates delays to your subcontractors, because you don't want them to show up and not be able to work. That's a problem, because the next time you need them to show up, they may say, you know what, you're probably not going to be ready for me anyway. I'm not going to be there. Updating your schedule allows your team to allocate their resources. You may have a vendor that's got 4 crews. They're looking at their schedules, their 4 schedules. Your schedule's never updated. They may not send you a crew until you call them and tell them that you're 100% updated or that you're ready for them. So if your schedule is always updated and your vendors know that, they're going to say, you know what, this schedule says they're ready. They're ready, because they always are. I'm sending a crew to them. And it serves as a historical document. When you start getting into delays and you start getting into legal battles, you need an accurate, updated schedule so that shows delays. It shows vendor X was supposed to be here on a Monday. He didn't show up till Thursday. I communicated to him with this schedule, blah, 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 blah. So let's talk about schedules as a forecast tool. Schedules need to be accurate, right? So that management can plan for financial needs. Management needs to look at the schedule and know this project is going to need X number of dollars in X number of days, because we have to pay these vendors, or they're going to need more manpower, or we're going to have revenue coming in because this project is close to completion. So we know we'll have revenue coming in to help us pay for these other jobs. We'll make our numbers, etc. So schedules are a predictor of cash flow for companies. They can look at their schedules and they know when they're going to have money coming in, which is critical if you're expecting a paycheck. It also allows subcontractors to allocate their crews and material resources. So, it'd be great if we had unlimited labor and unlimited materials just laying around waiting for us to build stuff, but we do not. So it needs to be planned for. Our subcontractors need to be able to take a look at a group of schedules and say, okay, in April, I'm going to need this many people. In June, I'm going to need this many people and this much material. In August, I'm going to need X number of material, and they can start to plan for that and they can budget for it. But only if your schedules are accurate. Historical data. And obviously, when you've completed projects, those completed schedules act as a historical data sheet, if you will. It helps you plan, okay, a job of this size, this complex, cost us this much. We thought it was going to take us this many days. It really took us this many days. And it makes you more competitive for future jobs because you've got the historical data. You know how much money you spent, how much time you spent building other products. What the allocations were for the job. Anyway, so that's a quick synopsis of the class. Like I said, I will log on every Wednesday until the class is over to answer any questions, and I will get your final exam out to you this weekend, if not today. It'll be a series of questions, and then you'll have a small schedule to put together. Easy peasy. You got 2 weeks to do it. And if you have any questions, call me, email me, text me, whatever. And this will be posted today. Thank you.